Good afternoon to everyone. Hamia Salamlar. Today we will be holding our first online meeting on COVID-19 situation, taking into account that the period that the whole quarantine and the situation around COVID-19 seems to be lasting more than everybody expected. We think that online meetings could be our next reality. So welcome to our first online meeting. I hope everyone is sound and safe. I hope everyone is having still some busy time and also some quality time with your families. Today, we wanted to give you an update, news update regarding a number of tax, legal, and finance issues which we are now facing. We will also have a Q&A session, and that will be divided into two parts. First, we'll answer those questions that were initially sent to the Chamber's office, to Chamber's email. So we have some questions which we already have, and there will be also questions which you will be able to raise while we're here in the meeting. And I want Zibar just to quickly give instructions on how these questions will be raised. Obviously, because it's an online meeting, we cannot have everyone, talk simultaneously or have a chance to talk simultaneously. So there are just a couple of technical tricks that we need to follow. Zibar, can you please quickly explain those rules, and then we'll go on with our update.
Yeah, sure. So good afternoon, everyone, and I hope really you and your families are safe and good. And I want to first of all thank you all of you for joining us, for taking your time. Secondly, of course, I want to thank our committee for this initiative. Arzu Hacıyeva, Sharaf Askarova, and of course Nazim Hacıyev for taking this initiative to provide updates regarding this important package for the business community. And for as Arzu Hanım already started, we will have first part when our speakers will provide information about updates regarding these packages. After that, we will going to questions which we received prior the meeting. And after those questions, you will be able to ask questions. What you have to do, you have to just, you see this button, raise your hand. You have to raise your hand, and then when Arzu Hanım will call your names, you will be able to speak and to discuss and ask your questions. And normally it should work, I think, smoothly, and I hope everything will get okay, because it's also our first webinar. So I think we can start. Thank you, Arzu Hanım.
Okay, thank you, Zibar, for the introduction of our rules. So now we go to our update. First of all, I'm sure all of you have been following very closely what is going on with the situation, news, and also unlike all the normal times, I'm also sure that a lot of people have been reading lately a lot of decrees of the Cabinet of Ministers. And you probably noted that there have been a number of documents, a lot of documents, in fact, that made a lot of consulting companies issue their news updates almost like 5 times a week because of the overwhelming number of news. But most of these news related to restriction of the activities of various businesses, also to further related to restriction of the movement of individuals around the city, around the country, and also, regarding different sanctions related to those who have been violating those rules. We don't want, frankly speaking, to concentrate on that, first of all, because this is no longer news. And second, our goal was to mainly concentrate on those changes or those updates that relate strictly to businesses, and that can hopefully give some relief to businesses. So that's why the main topic of our discussion today is the plan of activities of the plan of actions or activities of the government to support economic growth and entrepreneurial activity. So first of all, let me say my view of this document. There are a number of provisions in this document which are in support of the economic growth. They have a number of let's say, declarative at least plans that the government hopes will help supporting the economic growth and help supporting the entrepreneurial activity, which is obviously facing a lot of issues, problems, and also downturn in the current period. Some, because there are so many declarative plans in this document, it's not still certain how these plans will be implemented. Therefore, today we try to concentrate on a couple of areas which we believe are more or less certain compared to other measures. So first, I want to talk about one of the directions in this document, which talks about the tax measures, tax reliefs. And before I go to that, I would like to also make a note that this document relates mostly to those businesses, those spheres of economy, which have been included into the type of economic activities, into the list of economic activities, which are, have suffered from the COVID-19 situation. Obviously, we all understand that I don't think there's any sphere in the business and the economy right now which has not had any effect from the current situation. But for now, at least, the government has distinguished two groups of businesses, and first group is the one which they believe has suffered the most, and the measures that have been introduced by the government that mainly relate to this group of activities. There is a very detailed list of these economic activities. They are you can find this list all, among other sources on the site of the tax service agency, which is, now has been renamed from the Ministry of Taxes. And if, from the examples of those types of activities, these are hotels, hostels, tourism operators, tourism agents, all sorts of delivery services, restaurants, cafes, entertainment centers, also all those activities all those businesses whose activities mostly has been limited during the time of COVID-19. Again, the list is very detailed. It also has a number of manufacturing types of activities as well. If you want to check whether you are falling under those activities, you need to visit the site of the tax office. If you have further questions on that, we can answer it later as well. So we're coming to the tax incentives. At the moment, these tax incentives have also been included into the plan of actions in the form of directions. There are no specific exemptions with the timings, with the rates now, but at least it gives us a very good understanding of what kind of changes are expected. The way these tax incentives will be given, they will be given as soon as the changes to the tax code will be adopted. What I can say now is that the draft changes to the tax code have been already prepared, have been reviewed at the level of the former Ministry of Taxes, also Ministry Economy, and based on the information that I have there currently with the President's Office, at the review of this President's Office. Timing is, of course, pressing. And we were hoping that by the end of this week, the changes would be adopted. For now, we still don't have news about the adoption, but based on the timings of those exemptions and reliefs, they should be coming relatively soon. So what are the directions of the incentives? Those incentives will be pretty much given to specific types of activities, and specific types of activities and businesses will have different incentives. So they will not be applicable to all taxpayers, and also not even all those taxpayers which are considered to be affected by the COVID-19 situation. So depending on the type of activities, different exemptions will apply. So among the exemptions, which are exemption reliefs, which are now included into the plan of actions, is first of all, exemption from the assets tax and land tax to certain types of businesses. And this will be most probably 2019 assets tax and land tax. There will be a reduction to the rates of profit tax and rate of simplified tax to some taxpayers, and that will be given through an application of a coefficient to the current tax rate. There will be a prolongation of the deadline for payment of annual taxes, and it seems quite strange now that the deadline is, with the extension of the annual tax returns, the deadline is also quickly approaching, and still we don't have the change. But in the plan of actions, there is this measure. Again, as I said, we hope that the adoption of the changes will come soon, and the taxpayers will be aware of the renewed dates for the payment of the annual taxes. And here we're talking about profit tax, we're talking about assets tax. From the information that we have heard, based on the discussions with the different ministry officials, it could be prolonged to September 2020. For now, this is not certain, but this is the preliminary information that we have. Quite a hot topic is also rent payments and the situation around these. Obviously, a lot of businesses cannot now benefit from the rent agreements that they have. And of course, this is also becoming quite an expensive cost for the businesses, and government understands it as well. And in a way of getting some relief to rent payment costs, one of the measures in this plan is also to reduce withholding tax rates that apply to rent payments. Unfortunately, this is a limited measure because it will apply only to physical individual landlords, so it will not apply to legal entities. But that's partial compensation of the losses that are suffering by the business. I wouldn't say it's very significant, but at least that's what is also in the plan. Some businesses will get a reduction of the social contributions, so they will be relieved from social contribution payments. Again, it's not a full exemption, it will be a reduction of the payments. There is also in the plan a temporary suspension of the late payment interest application to underpaid taxes, to late paid taxes as well. So obviously the government also understands there's a serious cash flow issue for a number of businesses, and in trying to give some relief to businesses alongside the tough cash flow position, late payment interest will be suspended. Application of late payment interest will be suspended for some time. So there were more measures which are included in the plan. I tried to concentrate on those which can affect more businesses than to talk about those reliefs which can apply only to certain types of goods or certain types of services. So here on the tax measures, I would like to stop, and I would like to give the word to Sharaf. Sharaf will talk about another measure included into the plan of actions of the government. And as we already said, you can of course ask questions about any topic that we're discussing after we end our presentation. So Sharaf, the word to you.
Thank you, Arzu, and thank you everybody for joining. And as everybody else, I hope you're safe and sound, and keeping busy throughout these difficult days. As Arzu said, I will be talking about a rather narrow part of the program, which touches upon the compensation of employee salaries to businesses. The program itself is carried out by the government, and there's been the overall amount dedicated to this purpose is 215 million manats. Now this amount is supposed to cover around 300,000 paid employees. So it is a direct support to the businesses for partially, not fully, but partially covering their expenses related to employee salaries, because as we all know, one of the main expenses of the majority of businesses is the salary base. So the process is quite straightforward, although there is no a dedicated rule guide on obtaining this support from the government. But all the registers per the program, all the registers taxpayers are supposed to receive an SMS or a notification to their electronic cabinets, whereas they can go online and then choose from the section support to financial support from the government, and then choose their the support related to employee salaries, and then respectively fill out the necessary information. Now, all the information pertaining to the taxpayer itself will be automatically reflected on the electronic system. What the taxpayer needs to input manually is the information about the affected business that he has, about the number of employees, and a number of other specific information pertaining to receiving this financial support. What is envisaged under the program is that this amount will be transferred directly to the bank account of the taxpayer who's eligible under the program to receive such support. And as Arzu mentioned previously, the assumption was that all those businesses affected from such from the coronavirus will be eligible, and there was no list. But then the government released an exclusive and quite long list of businesses, of activities that fall under the category of businesses severely affected by the coronavirus, thus being eligible to receive this support. So only those businesses which are listed, which fall under the categories listed under this document, will be eligible to receive partial support for paying the employee salaries. Now, what needs to be taken into account is that obviously the government is not in a position to cover all the salaries, and what they will be taking as basis is the average monthly salary established in the Republic, which is 712 manats. So for any amount that falls under 712 manats, it will be compensated in full. Any amount that falls that goes beyond 712 manats will be limited to that amount. And again, what is important to note is that this amount is intended for April, for March, for month April and May only. Unfortunately, at the moment, we don't know whether there will be additional support with respect to this issue, or it will be limited only to this. The practice shows that a number of businesses, a number of companies have already applied and received this support. But there are again some practical issues related to distribution of this money, because when transferring the amount, the government doesn't really specify how it should be distributed. It's not always entirely clear whether it covers, for example, if a company has several activities, which exact activities they cover, it covers, how many employees it covers, etc. So there's kind of a gray area which is at the discretion of the company to decide, and unfortunately, there is no a state, an address where the taxpayer can apply and ask the question. So it's kind of depending on how the company is going to distribute the money that it has received. Basically, this is pretty much it about how the financial support on the employee salaries will be distributed. There are also some specific questions asked by our members, which we will address later. So if you have any additional questions, please feel free. And then Arzu, I'll give the floor to you.
Thank you, Sharaf. So now Nazim will tell us about the next item in the plan of activities, and those relate to the government supporting loans of the businesses, of the citizens. Nazim, the word is yours.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Basically, when it comes to bank loans, we're talking about business loans specifically. There are three specific incentives which are introduced by the government. One of them is for the new loans, for the new business loans, for the total maximum amount of 500 million manats. The government is ready to give state guarantee for 60% of that amount, plus cover 50%, basically half of the interest paid on those loans. This is applicable to business loans in specific areas with the interest rate of maximum 15% per annum and with a tenor of 3 years max. The second incentive is related to agro-business. The Agro Credit and Development Agency is instructed to offer unsecured microfinance, microloans to agro sector. The third incentive is related to existing loans. The loans which existed to the date, specific date is the 10th of March, 2020. For those loans, the government is willing to subsidize 10% interest on those loans for 12 months, for the next 12 months. The total amount of subsidy and support for the whole three items is 70 million manats, 70 million manats. We don't really have the specific, exact mechanism how it will work. Banks are expecting this from a central bank soon. We know what will be offered. We know the amounts, but the procedures will follow soon. That's pretty much it. I'm happy to answer questions after we finish with the agenda.
Okay, thank you, Nazim. We will proceed with our update. I will quickly talk about the situation related to compulsory medical insurance contributions. I don't know whether it's luck or not, whether it's our wishes, but the government has heard. I mean, I'm joking, of course. Yeah, I was just gonna say has heard us by us not wanting to pay this compulsory medical insurance contribution. So, thanks to COVID-19 situation, application of these contributions has been delayed. So the government will start collecting them from 1 January 2021. So the whole program has been shifted, delayed as well. It's also interesting to know that application of the insurance itself in Baku will start only, the plan is will start only from April 2021. So it's interesting to see that you know, collection will start from January, but the system itself will start working only from April. What it gives us as the chamber, as you may remember in our, I mean, those who participated in our last meeting, we were discussing on the dialogue that we want to have with the government regarding this whole medical insurance situation. It gives us, as the chamber, as the members, more time actually to have this discussion. I don't think now is the right time to do it, you know, given all the other, you know, pressing and important and difficult decisions that the government is now undertaking. So we obviously do not want to irritate the government right now, but probably as the COVID-19 situation, and hopefully we'll hope for that, of course, will start, diminishing its effect, that's the time when we will actively start discussions with the government on this particular issue. But at least the relief is that for the next several months of the year, the businesses will have a slight relief from all the costs that they are now facing, and that relates to their personnel. So till January 1, these contributions will not be applicable. Again, we're all, because it's an online meeting, it's a bit difficult for us to feel, of course, the feelings and emotions of our audience. But as we all try to say in the end of our small presentations, again, we're ready to respond to any questions related to every small topic that we're discussing. Another pressing issue, which I'm sure all of you are facing, all of your companies are facing right now, are the issues related to personnel costs, potentially in some businesses excessive personnel, how to act under the current circumstances. We have had a number of questions from our members, and we will raise them separately. But I also wanted us to have some general discussion about our vision of what is happening now in the country, in the market, and also in our legislation regarding and related to employment issues. So Sharaf, the floor is yours. Please start your presentation on employment issues.
So I'm back. As Arzu said, one of the most pressing issues at the moment are the employment, because, as I mentioned before, not all of the businesses are obviously affected by this situation, but not all of the businesses, not even the majority of businesses, are currently receiving support from the government. So naturally, the question arises as to what should everybody else do with the excessive workforce, most of which is now not in any way engaged, are working, maybe are not even working or working remotely. How is this all regulated? What are the statutory requirements, if any, and how should employers react? Again, as we said, there are several specific questions, very on-point questions, which we are going to address. So I will give you only a general info on what is going on. So as most of you, most of the businesses and most of us are now practicing, many businesses have switched to remote working from home, not physically being in offices, and many questions arise as to how correct this is from the legal perspective, whether there is a regulation on this or not. So what we can say in relation to this is that there is no specific provision in the labor code or in other legislative acts pertaining to employment regarding working remotely, working from home. In contrary, per our labor code, if we have to look at it narrowly, it says it gives a definition of workplace being a place that is given by the employer to the employee so that the latter can perform his or her job duties in due course. But considering the current situation, even in a number of the documents that have been issued starting from early March, there have been several references from the government to switching to remote working. Even in one of those, I don't remember exactly which one, but it said that the government strongly recommends the employers to send their employees to work remotely. Now, considering the situation and considering that yes, there is no direct prescription for it, but there is also not any restrictions on on implementing the remote working. We are of the opinion that employers don't have any other choice, and this is very unlikely to be challenged in future. What we think is the right thing to do at the moment is to somehow formalize this remote working regime so that both the employer and the employee agree and put it in writing somewhere that this arrangement is due to this and that purpose. Although I don't think somebody is going to question why it was done, but still it would be a good precaution to have. And this is what concerns remote working. The other thing that most of the businesses are concerned and asking questions are the layoffs, termination of employment agreements. As you are all well aware, and we have heard Mr. President and the Minister of Economy say it several times. It's even written in the decisions of the cabinet that employers are strongly discouraged to lay off their employees, to terminate their employment agreements, and this should be avoided to the maximum extent. Now, having said this, we are aware that still major layoffs are going in the country. The only thing that we could advise in this regard or could be useful to know to businesses is no matter why and under which circumstances the layoffs are taking place, they have to be duly formalized. All the procedural requirements of the labor legislation must be followed strictly, because these decisions may and will likely to be challenged in future. Employers must be mindful, must know that there is a category of protected employees whom they cannot fire under any circumstances, such as pregnant women having children, and impaired persons, etc. So if there is absolutely no choice for the business to proceed to remain in the market, then to proceed with the layoffs, then at least the least that the employer can do is make sure that all the statutory procedures have been followed. The other important thing, the other option, I would say, that businesses have been asking is possibility of sending employees on unpaid leaves. Now, as we mentioned previously, there are a number of business guides published by a number of consulting companies, including ours, which has detailed information on how to do this. Unpaid, if we have to give general information, unpaid leaves are possible, but there are certain requirements, again, that needs to be met. Leaves are possible when there are circumstances which are beyond the control of the employer and the employee, but only if it can be effectuated per the terms specified in the employment agreement. So if we have to put it in other words, employer needs to have specific provisions in the employment contract enabling it to send the employees on unpaid leave. And this shouldn't be an individual case, but it is concerning mass sending of employees on unpaid leaves. Many companies, including even some state agencies, majority of state agencies, are sending employees on paid leaves. This could be a relief to businesses which have employees with vast majority of unused vacation balance, which the employees have been accumulating through years. This could actually be a chance for them to kind of send these employees on paid leaves and reduce the remaining unused balance and unused vacation balance. And the last resort, not the last resort, but one of the other options is salary reduction. We've heard that there are, in order to somehow stay in business, some employers have chosen to reduce the salaries. This is also possible under the legislation, provided that consent of employee is given, and obviously principles of good faith need to be taken into account. This, if possible, needs to be done only for the period of this hardship for 1-2 months and not exceeding, not going well beyond of the virus situation. So in short, this would be, these are probably the main concerns of the businesses. And then I will talk specifically about each case in the Q&A section. Arzu?
Yeah, thanks, Sharaf. I'm sure there will be a lot of questions still coming on the employment-related issues. What we can also say is that, and I think a lot of people were wondering about it as well, at least there are no mandatory provisions in the decrees of the Cabinet of Ministers. All the statements made related to employment issues, they were more of a, let's say, recommendation character, because in some of the questions we also, had some comments saying that, this or that decree has these, requirements related to employment issues. So what I have also heard from Sharaf, what I have been also observing while reviewing the decrees, that there are no mandatory requirements related to employment issues. And, what Sharaf has also been mostly talking about are the practices and main provisions which arise basically from the current employment legislation. So at least there was nothing, there was nothing new in terms of legislation related to employment issues. But of course, there are a lot of practical issues, a lot of practical situations. Also, you're all aware that the ministry, now it's the Agency of Taxes, tax agency under the Ministry of Economy. They are also monitoring the situation related to salaries, compensations, and they're also collecting a lot of information related to the number of employees, to the pay related to employees as well. So it's from one side, it's that situation that is monitored, controlled by the government. From the other side, they have not imposed any strict, strict changes or strict prohibitions related to employees. And that's why there are a lot of questions related to this area as well. Okay, so thanks a lot, Sharaf, for your presentation. Now Nazim will give us update on the financial market situation in Azerbaijan, and hopefully not too much pessimism, with a slight hint of optimism as well, Nazim.
I'll do my best. Basically, I'll try to update you on what's happening on financial markets. First of all, the head of the central bank, Mr. Rustamov, has been again appointed. Basically, he remains at his position for the last, 25 years, 20 plus years. So we have seen recent statements by himself plus the president. They promised to do their best to maintain the exchange rate, which is good news for us, which gives us makes it easier for us to do business forecasts for this year. What else? On the banking side, banks are obviously don't have much business these days. They are getting prepared to see to deal with clients, borrowing clients basically, which will have difficulties with repaying their loans. So some banks have already announced certain measures, like they wouldn't charge penalties on delayed interest payments, etc. Obviously, banks understand the situation. They try to help the clients. I'm sure we will see more measures from the central bank on that. There are some measures which are being prepared but not announced yet. There are certain restrictions on foreign exchange, like individuals are only allowed to purchase a hard currency against manats for the total amount of 20,000 manats per year, actually. And there are certain restrictions on foreign exchange for, basically when I say foreign exchange, it's only one side, buying hard currency. Or for companies who buy hard currencies to pay for goods or services, basically, and payments are going outside Azerbaijan. All such cases are reported to the central bank and being approved by the central bank one by one, case by case. Of course, the preference is given to those who import medicine, food, and other necessities. We have also seen cases where the state bank has given subsidized loans to importers of important food items for the country. Those are case by case again. I haven't even seen that on the news. We see this, we heard this from the business, but it's not even public so much. It's case by case. So basically, yes, this is what's happening. So good news, exchange rate is still there. It's going to remain. The country has significant foreign exchange reserves. The oil fund has over $41 billion. The central bank holds, I think, over $6 billion in reserves. Taking into account the limited amount of Azeri manats in circulation, honestly, it's not that difficult to maintain 1.7 exchange rate for the regulator. So that's pretty much it. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Nazim. Now it's basically all we wanted to say on the update. And in fact, it has taken us almost 50 minutes, 45 minutes to give you an update. So we want to leave more time to the Q&A session. We'll start, as I promised, we'll start our Q&A session with those questions which had been earlier sent to the chamber. So I'll start with responding to the questions, then all of us will have their share of the questions as well. So question one, I'll just read it out quickly. Large multinational companies have a decentralized functional multi-hub way of working across countries. This is to say we're not organized as a complete set of function in each and every country. For example, our local legal setup may not be production or engineering, even though we do provide engineering or site services in a team collaboration with other companies' hubs. And this is stopping us to get the permission for Azerbaijan because our local declared object of activity does not fall into the categories defined by the government. Is it possible for some of our Azerbaijan employees to get this type of permission despite our local entity legal status? So from what I understand, this relates to the permission of employees to work at their workplace, and also for their movement in the city. If I understand the question correctly, there is an assumption in this question that only those employees can get a permission, e-permission, if they work for companies that are of production or engineering, nature, if their activity is coded like that. This is not correct. In any company, in fact, there is this general permission for all the employees which have this technical capacity, technical security or engineering security capacity. So in fact, even if the object of activities does not fall into this category, if you have employees who fulfill these particular functions, they can get permission for being physically present at the workplace. And also the fact is that there is also a lot of abuse going on currently with respect to this specific permission. A lot of employees have been requalified into becoming technical experts or technical security experts. So for now, this permission is working. There are maybe more questions asked when the permission is issued, but that's the answer to this question. So that was question 1. And of course, if that particular person who asked this question has some clarification or has some additional follow-ups, then you can raise your hand and ask a question afterwards as well. Question 2. It's in Azeri, but I will translate it. So the question is actually about the possibility that quarterly advance payments will be either delayed or whether they will be abolished. There are very general statements in the plan of actions by the government related to the payments in general. As I already noted, there are delays for the profit tax, envisaged delays or extension of periods for the profit tax payments, for the assets tax payment. But from our discussions with some of the ministry officials, it seems that for certain businesses, the advance tax payments may be abolished. And as I already said, this is now at the review of the President's office. So there is such a possibility that advance tax payments will be abolished for some types of businesses. And another question relates to taxes, employee-related taxes. The question is whether there is any exemption or reduction related to those taxes. As I also already mentioned in the news update section, for some types of businesses, social contributions will be reduced. Potentially there are no reductions to personal income taxes, but social contributions for some businesses will be reduced. Now, Sharaf, let's go to your questions. So starting from the 4th question, can you please continue?
Sure, thank you, Arzu. I'll read the question first. Again, it's in Azeri. It asks whether there is a possibility or whether it is envisaged to somehow waive by the lesser of the rent, or whether it will be regulated by the government, whether basically the government can impose on the lesser to waive rent as a measure of support of businesses. The answer to this question is actually quite short. Technically, it's a no, because as opposed to, for example, employer-employee relationship, whereas the state appears as a regulator and may affect this relationship because employee is a vulnerable party to the transaction, to this relationship, and employee by default needs state protection. Relationship between a lessor and the lessee, especially if these are two commercial entities, are of an independent business nature. So basically the regulator cannot or is very unlikely to pass a regulation that would financially impair or hurt one party to the transaction, because if the rent gets waived, yes, the lessee will be in a better position, but the lessor, maybe whose only place of business or profit is this object from where it gets the rent, will be put in a bad financial position. So the answer would be it is highly unlikely. 5th question, it's again about employment. The question is, we are sending employees on unpaid leave. Is this allowed? What type of funding allocations are going to be made by the government to assist payroll and other hotel financial obligations, tax reductions, etc.? And so Essentially, these are two separate questions, maybe even three. We are sending employees on unpaid leave. As I mentioned, it is allowed under the legislation. If you are sending them in mass, so a large amount of employees on unpaid leave, you have to, as an employer, you have to ensure that respective changes are made to their employment contract so as to reflect the possibility of sending them to unpaid leaves in case of emergency or in case of pandemic or this kind of situation which is outside of control of employer. Without having this, without going through this formality, basically, it would not be possible under the law to send the employees on unpaid leave. So the law explicitly says if you want to send the massively send the employees on unpaid leave, it has to be reflected in their respective employment agreements. So if you don't have them, first thing to do would be to amend the employment contracts and then based on the respective provision to send the employees on an unpaid leave. It is allowed only in that case. Paid leaves are allowed and even encouraged as per the decrees of the cabinet. With respect to funding and allocations to assist payroll, I think I talked quite in detail about it while talking about support, financial support to businesses. Hotels, as far as I know, specifically fall under the category of affected businesses. So and I've known from press that several hotels have now applied and received support for payment of salaries in part. Again, always subject to the requirements that were mentioned before. So it will be, the salary, the support will be calculated based on the average monthly salary specified for the government, which is 712 manats. So everything that goes beyond that amount will be limited to that amount. Everything that is lower will be compensated in full. About tax reductions, tax exemptions, Arzu talked in detail. I don't think I need to touch upon that.
Yeah, so we're basically waiting. We're basically waiting for the changes to the tax code, and as soon as they come out, we'll update you in writing. We may also consider having another webinar to discuss it. So for now, this is not certain. There are plans, but there is no certainty, especially to the hotels, because as I said, different business activities will have different incentives.
Thank you, Arzu. And the last question that was sent pertaining to employment, I think, is, again, it's in Azeri. It says, during the quarantine period, some of the employees of the company have voluntarily waived 20% of their salaries. In this case, do we have to reduce their weekly working hours by 20%? First of all, again, let me say that it is possible to follow this practice, to reduce the salaries of employees, provided that obviously they agree to it. So yes, it is possible. Do you have to, as employer, reduce the amount of working hours? The legislation is silent about that. Perception, the idea is that no, you don't have to do that. What the legislation says is before changing, because reduction of salary by default is perceived as change of working conditions, and any kind of change of working conditions by the employer needs to be notified in advance. So honestly, in practice, I don't know how practical it would be for the employer to notify the employee in advance, 1 month in advance about intention to reduce his salary, because this the voluntary waiver of salary is not envisaged. This by law, it will be interpreted as if this salary was reduced by mutual consent of the parties, in which case there needs to be a 1 month prior notification to the employee. The other thing that, yes, you can do this if your employees agree. No, you don't have to reduce the working hours per week. One thing that you as an employer need to keep in mind is that if you are reducing salaries of more than 10% of employees in a business which has more than 50 employees, employer needs to notify the relevant state body, which in this case is the Ministry of Labor and Social Protection. So for businesses who have more than 50 or more employees, if this kind of salary reduction affects more than 10% of the employees, such notification needs to be made to the state body. The Ministry of Labor has the authority to investigate this, and then the legislation says that it can apply some measures. Which measures doesn't specify, but at least a notification needs to be made. I think I answered all of the questions, Arzu. There's one pertaining.
Thank you, Sharaf. Yeah. The next question is question to Nazim to answer. Nazim, can you please continue?
Yes.
Question number 7, yeah.
Question number 7 is in Azeri. I will just translate. Basically, we are being asked if it is possible to get a subsidized loan from a bank to finance OPEX. The answer is yes, it is possible. I think we just mentioned the list of incentives on bank loans offered by the government. And I think you need to speak to your bank. You might, depending on your type of activity, you might also need to speak to a state bank, because for certain, as I mentioned, for certain types of activity, I think the International Bank of Azerbaijan specifically is offering subsidized loans, which again is not published in the media. But if you are a large importer or some essential food items, then I think you can talk to the state bank. So the answer is yes.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Nazim. We have a next question. Sharaf, can you please continue? It's question 8 in the revised agenda.
One second.
Well, let me read out the question, Sharaf. Maybe
yes,
there were
please,
a lot of revisions. Okay, one thing which actually it's a repetition of what we have already been discussing as well, so I think your answer will be quick. One thing which we would like to know is the following. Based on new regulations, we are not permitted to change the agreement with the employees. For example, from full-time contract to part-time, or we can't redundant the staff even based on the employee's own desire. I completely understand that the government is going and already started support measures, but in our case, it's a little bit tricky. We think that educational organizations will be able to go back to the normal work no sooner than September. We can't keep employees till September and pay salary. We need to somehow change the agreement. I think I can quickly respond to that. And Sharaf, you let me know if you have any comments to that. So basically, as we already said, there is nothing which is actually was a change to the labor legislation. There were no changes in any other legislative act which were in fact you know, which could be viewed as restrictory measures to make staff redundant, as restrictory measures to terminate employment agreements. So the labor legislation is the same. I mean, there have been no changes there. As we already said, there was some wording in different decrees of the cabinet ministers, which was of a recommendation nature. Also, the government made a promise not to downsize, not to downsize anything related to state officials, but they cannot have any restrictive measures towards the employees which are actually hired by businesses, by commercial sector, by non-government sector. And Sharaf has already mentioned about different measures, related to unpaid leave, about working remotely, about, reduction of hours, etc., etc. So Sharaf, if you want to add something, I think we have already responded to this, but I think the main answer here is that there should be no confusion as to the decrees now issued by the Cabinet of Ministers. There is nothing which obliges employees not to reduce the number of employees or not to terminate employment agreements.
Right, Arzu, you're completely right. As you said, there is no compulsory requirement. There is strong recommendation, which is by all means is not a requirement. So the assumption that the employer cannot terminate the employment agreement, or the employees themselves cannot resign voluntarily, is not entirely right. They can do that. They can also go on paid and unpaid leave, provided that statutory requirements are met. So.
Okay, thank you, Sharaf. The next question, the last question, which were submitted to us earlier. Another unclear situation is with the rent. As for the president's order, the rent of some place must be frozen, but there is no clear explanation. We left the office from 19th March and we don't know when we are back, whether or now we should pay out rent. Well, we already, I think, also responded partially to this question. First of all, there is nothing, again, in any of the documents issued by the Cabinet of Ministers which talk about freezing of rent payments. This is a civil rights, these are civil legal relations, and the government cannot impose also any restrictions on such relations. In the plan of actions by the government, there were some measures regarding the freeze of rent payments, but only where the landlord is the government itself, yeah, but not to those rents which are actually just concluded between different businesses, individuals, or legal entities. And for example, those relate to industrial parks, etc. But when it comes to rent which is where the government is not the landlord, there's actually no freezing. There is there are no restrictions there. There are no regulations there. The only regulation is the provisions which are included into your rent contract, civil code, and that's all. So basically, if you cannot agree with your landlord regarding the rent payments, that's the relationship between the two parties to settle, to resolve. The government cannot intervene into these relations, and Sharaf has already also partially answered that question. So this is it for the questions that we had before that. We have one new question, which was raised in the online meeting, and that question comes from Ilgar Mehti. So Zibar, if you could unmute Ilgar and we'll listen to his question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much, Arzu, and to your team for doing very comprehensive, indeed, very comprehensive research on this subject. I keep reading this myself, but every time I keep having questions. And here again, I share the joy with you that the deferred medical payments really was a good luck. And I agree also equally that we should not touch this subject at this moment in time, but we should keep an eye on this. Perhaps as a committee, you will do that, I hope. So I have two questions, one to you on tax and one to Nazim on submission of profit tax returns, right?
Yes.
we are actually experiencing delays with getting approvals to postpone the submissions, and sometimes even getting, you know, blackout refusals from the tax ministry. Is this something that you also experience yourself with your company or your clients?
Is it the delay that you know, it's the delay where the tax is paid and you want an extension of the submission of the profit tax return?
Actually, yes. There was no request for submission. There was no request to defer the payment as such. In fact, in those cases that I was referring to, the client overpaid taxes already. It was only the question of postponing the actual submission of the report. The reason being that as soon as you submit the report, you get all kinds of follow-up questions, and people are just not available to answer those questions. So usually you would normally get, you know, immediate response, and most of the time it's positive. But we're actually experiencing refusals this time, and I was quite surprised by that.
Yeah, frankly speaking, we haven't experienced that. Again, in a case where tax has already been paid. In fact, what we see is tax office is also quite flexible in some of the submissions. You know, some of the taxpayers are having problems with their electronic devices to be able to submit returns through Kargüzarlık. The tax office was quite also receptive in accepting them through, you know, simple, you know, communications with the tax office rather than the electronic usual submission. So I'm a bit surprised to hear that. But also what we see, what we feel is that the tax office, you know, the tax office's practices right now are not entirely consistent. So in some divisions, in some departments, we see a very friendly, you know, relation to the taxpayers, and also the fact that they want and can accommodate a lot of requests of the taxpayers. From the other side, I have heard a number of cases lately that, you know, in some tax departments, the tax officials have started using old tricks such as, you know, writing off tax amount based on mere accruals, which are erroneous. So we feel that what the tax officials are doing now is not entirely consistent. So it's maybe no, it's a trend that we see now. So we have not faced the refusal of the tax office for the delays of profit tax submission. You see that, but we also had some negative experiences on different matters.
Okay, well, that's at least helpful for me to know. So I'll follow up on that myself. And the second question is to Nazim. I think maybe he clarified that, but I just want to make absolutely sure. Nazim mentioned that there are subsidized loans. Again, in practice, we're experiencing quite the opposite. And these subsidies and the simplified loan procedures, Nazim, are they only available to impacted businesses, those which have been impacted by COVID, or they're also going to be available across the board to all entities? What is your vision on that?
At the moment, thanks, Ilgar. At the moment, our understanding is it's going to be basically applied to the business suffering from this current situation. Because the amount of the state support is pretty limited. Overall, 70 million marats is not really a huge amount. So I don't think it can be physically applied to anyone who applies basically for a subsidy. So yeah, unfortunately. But again, we're waiting for the procedures. We're waiting for the details of the mechanism, which is not announced yet.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. That's it from me.
Thanks, Ilgar, for your questions. Thanks to everyone for responding. We have also 3 questions from Lala Ibrahimova. So I'll quickly read out these questions if not all of you see them. So first question, in addition to areas of activity identified as being affected by the pandemic, there are cases of declining activity and weakening profitability. How can these areas receive assistance from the state? I agree with you, Lala, 200% that in fact, I believe that limiting, areas of activities which are determined as affected by the damming, in my view, is not entirely correct, because pretty much everybody is affected. And of course, there are some levels of the hit by the COVID-19 situation to different businesses. But from what we see now is that the government has already separated those types of activities from all the others. And at the moment, we do not see that other businesses will receive assistance from the state. So there is no basis for us to say that everybody else will be also receiving the assistance. So another question from Lala is about the discount for the financial sanctions. So as I already mentioned, there is a relief which will apply. It's a relief to the late payment interest. As for the financial sanctions, frankly speaking, I don't think the relief will be coming. I guess the nature of the financial sanction is that it's an erroneous action. The most severe financial sanction when we talk about tax violations is understatement of the reporting of taxes. So that's why I don't think even by its nature, the government will be ready to offer any discount for the financial sanctions. So any taxpayer who is ready to understate taxes, is intentionally, that's what the government, that type of activity, that type of behavior, the government obviously wants to punish. When it comes to late payment interest, that relates to the inability of businesses to pay taxes on time. So that the government is now probably viewing as a force majeure situation, is considering as a situation which is beyond the control of a taxpayer, and that's why they are ready to offer relief there. And when it comes to financial sanctions, they are not. So another question is, can there be a reduction in interest rates on taxes, income and profit tax base? Interest rate, I'm not quite sure, frankly speaking, what the question is about. If we're talking about late payment interest, then I already responded to that. If we're talking about the tax rates, so profit tax rates, simplified tax rates, those will be reduced, but again, they will be reduced only with respect to those types of activities which are considered to be affected by the pandemic. And Lali, if you think I misinterpreted your question, you are free either to raise hand or to write a clarification here, or we can, if you raise your hand, we unmute you and you can ask your question live, in a live mode. So we have another question from Arzu Askerova, state support program. Is it paid 1 month only, or the total payout is split for 2 months, April and May? The total program, the total payout is split in 2 months. So it's not payment for the 2 months separately, but it's a payment in 2 installments during the 2 months. Another question from Arzu. To apply to this program, we need to comply with following points. Redundancies and salary reduction should not be allowed. Funds paid to entrepreneurs under the state program should be used only for the intended purpose, that is salary payments to employees. Compulsory state insurance payments have to be made in accordance with all the requirements of the legislation. Yes, that's right. And I don't see a question here. This means we cannot reduce salaries if we applied for state support program. Sharaf, do you want to make any comments here on this question from Arzu?
I also don't think there is a question. It's rather a statement, and it is correct for that matter.
Okay, yes. So if you want to get help from the state, then all the creative measures related to reduction of general salary costs then cannot be followed. That's the outcome of all these statements and all the rules included into the plan for the support of economic growth and economic activity. Can we send people on unpaid leave during quarantine period since these days are considered non-working days? Can we send people on unpaid leave during non-working days? Our lawyer said no. Sharaf, do you want to hop in and answer this question?
We send people on unpaid leave during quarantine period. Well, quarantine period is not considered as non-working days. Let's start with that. They are considered working days. You're just working remotely. So in that respect, I would say yes. Can we send people on unpaid leave during non-working days? That is a no. During non-working days, unfortunately, you cannot send employees on any kind of leave because those are non-working days.
Yeah, I think the essence of this question was from the wrong interpretation of the quarantine period as the non-working days. So because these are not non-working days, they should be viewed as regular working days, but where an employee cannot perform a job function at the workplace. Correct. And then all the statements, all the facts, all the discussions that we've had so far equally relates to the quarantine period as well. Do employees accumulate vacation during period? I mean, paid annual vacation. So I will respond, Sharaf, if you have any comments. So if they're working, obviously, then their vacation period is also accumulated during this period, which is not considered as a non-working period.
Correct.
If they do not work, I mean, if the arrangement with the employees is that they do not do work, then all the measures which Sharaf has already mentioned should be also considered, regulated, formulated. So if they are not formulated, then obviously you also don't have a probably proof that they are not doing any work, right, Sharaf?
That's true.
Yeah.
If they do not work, it's not because of quarantine period by law, basically. Quarantine period, this is just in the eyes of the regulator, it's just an ordinary period where your employees work from home. So if they don't work, then send them on unpaid leave or paid leave.
Okay, do you notice any other questions?
I don't.
I do not. I also do not see any raised hands. So let's wait for another, I would say, 5 minutes. And if we don't get more questions, then yeah, thanks Arzu for thanking us. Thank you for everyone who was active in asking questions from us. It's a pleasure to be helpful. It's also a pleasure to know that, you know, we bring some value to you in this online meeting as well. But if we don't have any other questions, then we will end our meeting. Okay, I think from the absence of any activity right now in a Q&A session and also in raising hands, I believe that then there are no more questions. I thank, first of all, Sharaf, Nazim. I thank Ziver and Aygun for organizing this online meeting. I thank all of you who participated as well. We will continue this practice once something very important and you know, something which we believe should be definitely communicated to you is enacted, is introduced. So thanks everyone for your time, for your participation.
Thank you, Arzu.
Yeah, then goodbye to everyone.
Thank you, and thank you for committee for organizing it and for these initiatives.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Have a good day, everyone.